It's a regular day in New York's financial district. Traders hustle inside glass towers, the streets below are buzzing with life, and then everything changes. A massive explosion rips through the heart of Manhattan. Buildings collapse for blocks. A fireball swallows everything in its path. Thousands scream in terror, but not at ground zero. There's no one left. They were instantly vaporized. Above it all, a mushroom cloud rises into the sky. There were no planes, no missiles, no warning. This nuclear attack was completely invisible, and on today's episode of the Infographic Show, we'll explain why. A full-scale nuclear war involving hundreds of multi-megaton intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, crossing borders has only one outcome: mutually assured destruction, or MAD. And that's exactly why countries like the US, Russia, China, France, the UK, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and unofficially Israel all maintain nuclear arsenals. These weapons exist not to be used but to serve as the ultimate deterrent against large-scale nuclear or conventional attacks. But there's a far more likely nuclear threat that threatens all nations, even the US. And this threat is invisible, much more difficult to detect beforehand. But it could have equally devastating consequences. We're talking about smaller nuclear devices that can be planted and detonated practically anywhere. There's no need for them to be attached to a missile and fired from an airplane, submarine, or a ground-based missile launcher. They are an invisible threat. These devices fall into two categories: the so-called dirty bombs and tactical nuclear weapons, which include suitcase bombs that have been a staple threat of spy thriller movies since the 1970s. Of the two, dirty bombs are far less destructive, but that is not to downplay the damage they could cause, especially if they detonated in a critical area like Wall Street. So what's the difference between them? A dirty bomb, otherwise known as a radiological dispersal device or RDD, is a type of explosive device that combines a conventional explosive, such as dynamite, with a radioactive material. However, a dirty bomb is in no way similar to a nuclear weapon or a nuclear bomb. A nuclear bomb, whether strategic as in nuclear-tipped ICBMs, or tactical, which we'll unpack shortly, creates an explosion that is millions of times more powerful than that of a dirty bomb. The physical devastation caused by even the smallest tactical nuclear weapon is on a completely different scale than something like a dirty car bomb. A nuclear blast can spread deadly radiation across tens or even hundreds of square miles. By contrast, a dirty bomb's radioactive contamination might only affect a few city blocks. Tactical nuclear weapons, also known as non-strategic nuclear weapons, are designed for highly targeted use, such as on the battlefield. They're generally smaller in explosive power compared to strategic weapons, which are intended to target enemy cities and military bases far from the front lines. Tactical nukes include gravity bombs, short-range missiles, artillery shells, depth charges, and torpedoes equipped with nuclear warheads. However, they can also be attached to landmines or inside containers like suitcases, placed in the desired location, and then detonated remotely and invisibly. The purpose of all nuclear bombs, strategic or tactical, is as weapons of mass destruction. On the other hand, the purpose of a dirty bomb is to cause great economic and social disruption disproportionate to the actual radiological effects, and well beyond the physical destruction from the conventional bomb components. That's why they're often considered to be weapons of mass destruction. It's primarily a psychological weapon, not a nuclear one. As a result, there is a huge difference in the way the US prepares for and would deal with the consequences of a dirty bomb explosion compared to that of a tactical nuke. To illustrate, let's compare the impact of a dirty bomb and a tactical nuke with 1 kiloton of explosive power right in the heart of Manhattan's financial district. That's roughly the upper limit for a dirty bomb and the lower threshold for the smallest tactical nukes known. A dirty bomb at that scale would have a blast force comparable to a massive truck bomb. Structures within 0.1 to 0.3 miles would be destroyed or severely damaged, similar to what happened during the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing at the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. A 1 kiloton tactical nuke, however, would level multiple city blocks. At ground zero, within a 0.2-mile radius, there would be near total destruction. All buildings, including steel-framed high-rises, would collapse or be severely damaged, and fatalities would approach 100%. 0.2 to 0.5 miles away, there would be severe damage to most structures, with many collapsing. High casualties would result from flying debris, firestorms, and pressure injuries. To a lesser extent, similar damage and injuries will occur up to 2 miles away. Broken gas lines and electrical sparks would ignite multiple fires, and with emergency services crippled by infrastructure collapse, these blazes could merge into a citywide inferno, echoing the firestorm seen in Dresden during World War II. Power, water, and communications would fail across Lower Manhattan, and subways and tunnels would be flooded or blocked. It would be extremely hazardous for emergency services to enter the area for 24 to 48 hours, hampered by debris, fires, and extreme radiation. A tactical nuke would unleash intense thermal radiation, generating fireballs that vaporize or incinerate everything within a 0.6-mile radius instantly. By contrast, a dirty bomb of the same size wouldn't come close to that kind of devastation. The nuclear explosion and fireballs would result in tens, if not hundreds of thousands of immediate deaths. Meanwhile, the dirty bomb blast would likely kill only those in the immediate vicinity, hundreds or perhaps a few thousand. And then there's the radiation. In a dirty bomb, it's not the radioactive material in the dirty bomb that explodes. Instead, it's the TNT, ammonium nitrate, liquid fuel, or other conventional explosive to which the radioactive material is attached. That means that compared to the fission of highly radioactive enriched uranium or plutonium isotopes in a nuclear bomb, the effects of the radiation would be minimal. Radiation from a 1-kiloton dirty bomb would only disperse over the immediate area around a square mile in total, depending on the strength and direction of the prevailing wind. And that's because a key aspect of dirty bombs is that they are self-limiting. The greater the dispersal, the lower the radioactive doses. A fist-sized amount of powdered cesium chloride, for example, is lethal after about 1 hour of exposure at 3.2 feet. However, this amount of radiation is not dangerous if it's spread out by an effective car bomb over 10 square city blocks, because the surface area of 10 square city blocks is over 1 billion square feet. Plutonium and enriched uranium isotopes are not considered good dirty bomb materials because they're primarily alpha emitters and thus costly, well-tracked, and secured. That means that they cannot be obtained in large amounts. For the purposes of a dirty bomb, cesium-137 in particular, 137 cesium chloride powder is the most effective material. It's easily dispersible, hard gamma-emitting, and very cheap at around $3 per curie. Cobalt-60 and strontium-90 could also be used. The more limited radioactivity of these isotopes means that only those people close to the blast itself would receive a significant dose of radiation. Those within half a mile of the blast would probably receive lethal doses, and those up to a mile away suffering severe radiation sickness, including nausea, vomiting, and hemorrhage. Many of those will die in due course without quick and effective treatment. However, according to some experts, everyone else within the broader radiation dispersion radius should technically be able to just go home, shower, and then bag their clothes. Limited radioactive hotspots may remain, but they can be identified, contained, and cleaned, as we'll discuss a little later. There is, of course, a higher risk of cancer developing in anyone exposed, and hundreds or even thousands would likely succumb to the disease in the following years. But there would be no nuclear winter, and depending on the rate of dispersal, the climate and agriculture should not be adversely affected for decades to come. On the other hand, the death toll from radiation from a tactical nuke would be on a completely different scale. That's particularly true in the case of enhanced radiation weapons, the so-called neutron bombs, which are designed to maximize ionizing radiation exposure and minimize blast effects. Whether it's a neutron bomb or a standard plutonium or uranium warhead, the initial burst of lethal neutron and gamma radiation would instantly kill everyone within several miles. The radioactive fallout would then spread for tens, if not hundreds of miles, where it would last for years, possibly even decades. Cancer rates would skyrocket, debilitating and killing countless more. Large parts of Lower Manhattan would have to be sealed off, and agriculture and the climate would be devastated. But the consequences of a tactical nuclear explosion in Lower Manhattan certainly wouldn't end there. The New York Stock Exchange and major banks would be incapacitated indefinitely, if not obliterated, triggering a global financial panic. Stock markets worldwide would crash, and the U.S. would then be thrown into financial, political, and social crises well beyond anything in its long history. Martial law would also undoubtedly have to be declared in New York and possibly in other parts of the country as chaos and panic spread. The national psychological trauma that would result is difficult to imagine, as are the consequences of it. And then, once the perpetrators have been identified, the world may find itself in the throes of a full-scale nuclear war as the U.S. responds militarily. While nowhere near as devastating, the consequences of a dirty bomb on Wall Street would also be unprecedented. Depending on the exact location of the blast and the physical damage done, much of Wall Street would be forced to shut down for days, if not weeks or months. Global markets would panic, possibly causing a global crash. Real estate prices across Manhattan and greater New York City would be affected negatively, and tourism and business travel to the city would undoubtedly decline until the situation is stabilized. However, unlike a nuclear attack, a dirty bomb would not cripple the US government or trigger global nuclear war fears, but it would strike fear in everyone. Ultimately, the resulting evacuation, disruption of services, shutdown of the local economy, and the costly cleanup are the real points of a dirty bomb, not the death and destruction like a nuke. Every day that Lower Manhattan is closed would cost the US economy an estimated $60 million. As the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated, invisible enemies like viruses are in many ways more terrifying than overt dangers, and radiation is inherently much scarier than a pathogen. The impact of lockdowns, masks, and social distancing in controlling the spread of the virus might be up for debate, but at least these measures gave people a sense that they could do something about it. Against radiation, however, such measures would be completely useless. So, how real is the invisible nuclear threat from dirty bombs and tactical nukes? Who has them, and how easy or difficult are they to obtain? In terms of tactical nukes, the main threat comes from Russia. President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly threatened the use of nuclear weapons against Ukraine, but he's likely talking about the use of tactical nukes as opposed to his arsenal of 4,500 strategic warheads. Russia also possesses some 2,000 tactical nuclear weapons kept in storage facilities throughout the country. These weapons, which have a yield ranging from a fraction of 1 to 50 kilotons, are primarily intended to be attached to short-range Iskander missiles. But as previously noted, they can also be attached to invisible remotely detonatable devices like landmines and so-called suitcase bombs. It's hard to foresee a situation where Putin is likely to risk the possibility of mutually assured destruction by setting off a nuke in New York City. But Russia is not the only other nation believed to have this class of weapon. The US also has them, along with North Korea, Pakistan, and Israel, although details about their tactical nuclear weapons programs are sketchy to say the least. If he felt threatened enough, North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un might be tempted to set off a nuke in Manhattan and risk his nation being turned to glass, the likely US response. His relations with the US are adversarial, to put it mildly. While unlikely to give nukes to terrorists, he might well sell radiological materials for cash, such as the case of the VX nerve agent used in the assassination in Malaysia in 2017. Conversely, the Pakistani government has much closer ties to the US, especially in the military sphere, so a state-sponsored attack is highly unlikely. However, Pakistan's security measures at its military and nuclear facilities are suspect and have been breached before, so it's possible that one of the many anti-American Islamist terrorist groups active in that country might be able to steal one. And if the likes of Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, Lashkar-e-Taiba, or Jaish-e-Mohammed ever managed to smuggle a tactical nuke into Manhattan, the devastation would make 9/11 pale in comparison. Fortunately, slipping a nuke, or indeed any radioactive materials, into the US is no easy feat. Illicit radioactive materials can be detected in shipping with tools such as a radiation portal monitor. Similarly, unshielded radioactive materials may be detected at customs checkpoints by Geiger counters, gamma ray detectors, and even Customs and Border Patrol pager-sized radiation detectors. Hidden materials may also be detected by X-ray inspection or picked up by infrared detectors. So, the likeliest way of smuggling a tactical nuke into the US would be via unguarded stretches of coastline or other barren border areas. But when all things are considered, the likelihood of a tactical nuke attack on the US remains extremely low. This is mainly due to the limited number of actors capable of such an attack and the certainty of an overwhelming US response. The real threat is a dirty bomb. While no one has pulled it off yet, there have been several attempts and dangerously close calls. In November 1995, a group of Chechen separatists buried a cesium-137 source wrapped in explosives at Izmailovsky Park in Moscow. A Chechen rebel leader alerted the media and the bomb was defused. 3 years later, in December 1998, the Chechen Security Service uncovered radioactive material strapped to an explosive mine. It was hidden near a railway line outside Grozny, the Chechen capital. But there have also been scares in the US and UK. On May 8, 2002, Jose Padilla, aka Abdullah al-Muhajir, was arrested on suspicion that he was an al-Qaeda terrorist planning to detonate a dirty bomb in the US. Padilla had not obtained radioactive material or explosives at the time of the arrest, but authorities uncovered evidence that he was on reconnaissance for usable radioactive material and possible locations for detonation. There were claims that the arrest was somewhat politically motivated, given the proximity to the 9/11 attack and the heightened awareness at the time. But in 2006, Dairen Barot from North London pleaded guilty to conspiring to murder people in the UK and the US using a radioactive dirty bomb. He planned to target underground car parks within the UK and buildings within the US, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank buildings in Washington, D.C., the New York Stock Exchange, and Citigroup buildings in New York City. Later in January 2009, investigators into the murder of a white supremacist, James G. Cummings, found containers of 35% hydrogen peroxide, uranium, and thorium. He also had supplies of lithium metal, aluminum powder, beryllium, boron, black iron oxide, and magnesium. Alongside the barrels was literature on how to build dirty bombs and information about radioactive materials. He was clearly intending to build a dirty bomb and use it, although officials stated that the public was never at risk. And perhaps most alarmingly, in July 2014, ISIS militants seized 88 pounds of uranium compounds from Mosul University in Iraq. The material was unenriched, so it couldn't be used to build a conventional fission bomb. But a dirty bomb was a theoretical possibility, notwithstanding uranium's less than ideal suitability for a dirty bomb. That particular incident may not be the most dangerous terrorist threat that the US has had to contend with, but radioactive substances in the hands of organized, well-funded multinational terrorist organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda are much harder to track down and deal with. Unfortunately, an abundance of sources for the radioactive materials needed to make dirty bombs are available to terrorists. Radioactive materials are used in the field in many countries, particularly for medical research and industrial applications. Dozens of radiological source producers and suppliers are found on 6 continents, and about 1 billion sources exist worldwide, although most, like household smoke detectors, have such low activities that they pose no threats. There are about 10,000 sources worldwide that exceed 1,000 curies. The largest sources use cobalt-60, cesium-137, or strontium-90, ideal for dirty bombs because the larger the source, the more cost-effective the application. Consider food and produce irradiation, for example. In 2002, the USDA approved the import of irradiated food, which led to a surge in food irradiators in countries exporting to the US, particularly in Southern Asia. That means that there are millions of sources worldwide from which radioactive materials can be found, stolen, or purchased legally. Of those, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission has estimated that within the U.S., approximately 1 source is lost, abandoned, or stolen every day of the year. Within the European Union, that estimate is 70 per year. Thousands of such orphan sources are scattered throughout the world, although less than 20% are estimated to be suitable for a dirty bomb. Russia is believed to have housed thousands of orphan sources, which were lost following the collapse of the Soviet Union. These include high-risk types like the beta-emitting strontium-90 sources used as radioisotope thermoelectric generators for beacons in lighthouses in remote areas of Russia. So, if a terrorist group really wanted to lay their hands on dirty bomb materials, there's no shortage of opportunity. However, there are several additional conflicting requirements that the terrorists would need to consider. First, the source should be radioactive enough to create direct radiological damage at the explosion, or at least to inflict societal damage or disruption. Second, the source should be transportable, with enough shielding to protect the carrier but not so much that it'll be too heavy to maneuver. Third, the source should be sufficiently dispersible to effectively contaminate the area around the explosion. But, assuming they manage to build, import, and set one off, how would the US deal with a dirty bomb explosion? And what is it doing to prevent one from occurring? The only effective response to a dirty bomb attack is to deluge the affected area with water immediately. 100 fire hydrants going for 24 hours delivers about 100 million gallons of water, enough to wash the 2.2 pounds or so of 137 cesium chloride powder into the sewer system and out to sea, where it would be so diluted that the risk of radiological exposure would be minimal. After that, besides efforts to deal with the casualties and damage to buildings and infrastructure, the most important task for the authorities will be managing perceptions. Radiological risks have been greatly sensationalized for decades. The subject of radiation is generally not taught in school and is generally not understood. Rather, what most people know about radiation comes from Hollywood. But in reality, no one ever dies in the nuclear power industry except for in an occasional fall or non-nuclear related accident every 5 years or so. On the other hand, in just 1 year, nearly 500,000 Americans die from smoking and almost 40,000 from car accidents. Even food poisoning kills 5,000 Americans every year. The misperception of how dangerous radiation is constitutes the #1 reason dirty bombs are so effective. So, how responders and the public react to an attack will determine its success. If a dirty bomb attack shut down Manhattan for just 1 year and racked up $100 billion in cleanup costs and lost business, it would be considered a major win by the attackers, likely triggering copycat plots. But if the US is even moderately prepared, responds swiftly, and keeps the fallout, economic and otherwise, under 100 million in that crucial first week, the odds of a second attack drop dramatically. That's why the US takes the threat so seriously. It's implemented a multi-layer strategy to prevent nuclear and radiological terrorism, focusing on securing foreign stockpiles, hardening domestic defenses, and disrupting terror networks. Internationally, the Non-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, which commenced in 1991, secured former Soviet nukes, dismantled 7,600 warheads, and safeguarded fissile material. However, the program ended in Russia in 2014, and now can be considered a key vulnerability. The Megaports Initiative is another multinational program designed to prevent the flow of radioactive materials. Under the program, radiation detectors have been installed in over 700 ports worldwide. This has led to the discovery of enriched uranium smuggled out of Russia at a Rotterdam port in 2003. In a similar vein, the National Technical Nuclear Forensics Center tracks bomb materials to their origin. But the US has also taken significant steps to shore up its defense against radioactive attacks domestically. The Radiological Security Program has already upgraded security for a number of US medical and industrial sites storing cesium and cobalt. It's replaced cesium blood irradiators with non-radioactive alternatives. The Nuclear Detection Office scans major cities for radioactivity constantly, with programs such as NYC's Ring of Steel, which uses hidden sensors. The Department of Homeland Security runs the first responder training programs such as Gotham Shield, which simulate dirty bomb attacks in urban areas and enhance readiness to deal with them. The U.S. is also involved in ongoing international intelligence and counterterrorism operations to reduce the threat at the source. These include the Global Threat Reduction Initiative, which has already secured high-risk radiological material in nearly 40 high-risk countries like Iraq and Ukraine, and counter-terrorist financing, which tracks money flows to WMD procurers. Several huge risk areas remain, such as Russia and Pakistan's less than secure arsenals, and sizable stores of abandoned radioactive waste in Central Asia and Central Europe. Some of the U.S.'s cesium sources remain in less than secure facilities. The U.S. could and probably should address these by, for example, expanding buyback programs for radioactive materials from hospitals and companies. It can also deploy AI at the borders to flag suspicious shipments, setting up a global rapid response team to secure materials after regime collapses, and targeting strikes on terrorist WMD labs. But the most constructive thing that it can continue to do is educate the public about the perceived versus real risks of radiation. Panic remains the #1 challenge after an attack. Want to see what would happen in the worst-case scenario? Watch What If Every Country Launched Nuclear Weapons Minute by Minute, or click on this video instead.